They thought I'd never find out about the depth of his betrayal, about the months of secret planning that went into my own public humiliation, culminating in an act so brazen, so cruel, it still makes my blood boil, and then surprisingly sing. My name is Celeste Beaumont, I'm 39, and until recently I was a meticulously organized marketing director who believed in meticulously planned happiness. I'd orchestrated award-winning campaigns for global brands, launched products that exceeded every forecast, and for what I thought was our upcoming 10th anniversary, I had poured my heart, soul, and a significant chunk of my savings, $15,000 to be exact, into crafting the most breathtaking romantic celebration imaginable, a 2-week luxury tour of Italy. What I didn't know was that my trip wasn't intended for me. The truth I discovered just moments before we were supposed to board our first-class flight to Florence was a gut punch that nearly brought me to my knees. But what they didn't know, what my soon-to-be ex-husband Thomas and his gleefully complicit secretary Veronica couldn't possibly have conceived, was that their callous cruelty would become my liberation, and their stolen dream vacation would become the stage for my ultimate, perfectly served revenge. The voicemails I later received filled with their dawning horror as they found themselves stranded on what was essentially a 5-star airport floor in Florence, pure, unadulterated Michelin star-worthy gold. If you've ever felt betrayed, taken for granted, underestimated, or publicly humiliated by someone you trusted, comment, "I'm stronger now" below and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, if you've ever fantasized about turning the tables on those who wronged you, this story will not only resonate, it will empower you to reclaim your own narrative. You won't want to miss a single detail of how their Italian dream imploded and how I found my own victorious Italian renaissance. For nearly 15 years, I'd been Celeste Beaumont, devoted wife to Thomas, and for the last 10, a dedicated marketing director at a leading Portland firm. I thrived on order, on details, on seeing a plan come to fruition. My campaigns were successful because I left nothing to chance, and I'd applied the same diligence to my marriage. I genuinely believed we were happy, perhaps settled into a comfortable rhythm, but happy nonetheless. Thomas was a senior project manager at an engineering firm, intelligent, and once I thought deeply kind. In the early years, he was my biggest cheerleader. But slowly, subtly, things had shifted. His power in our relationship grew not through overt aggression, but through a creeping emotional distance, a subtle erosion of my confidence that I, in my desperate desire to maintain the image of a perfect marriage, had foolishly ignored. The pattern of injustice wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow drizzle that had soaked me to the bone before I even realized I was cold. The first example was the ongoing condescension. For years, whenever I spoke passionately about my work projects at dinner parties, Thomas would often roll his eyes, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, yet it stung. "Oh, Celeste and her little marketing projects," he'd chuckle, or "Celeste always so methodical," as if my attention to detail, the very skill that made me successful, was a quaint, slightly amusing personality quirk rather than a professional asset. He'd make subtle put-downs disguised as jokes, little digs that left me feeling small while everyone else chuckled oblivious. Then came the blatant favoritism towards Veronica. She joined Thomas's department as his secretary about 6 months before everything imploded. Young, ambitious, with a predatory glint in her eyes, I'd initially dismissed as youthful enthusiasm. The company holiday party just 6 months prior to what I now call the Italian job was a turning point I failed to heed. Thomas, who usually made a cursory appearance before wanting to leave, openly doted on Veronica all evening. He laughed louder at her jokes, refilled her wine glass constantly, and hung on her every word. I made a light comment trying to mask my unease about Veronica's youth. Thomas, his voice sharp, retorted, "Youth brings fresh perspective, Celeste, something people our age sometimes forget." He said it loudly enough for Veronica to hear, and she offered me a tight, knowing smile. The implication was clear: I was old news, stale, uninspiring. The The most painful injustice, however, was the calculated deceit and the financial and emotional exploitation surrounding our anniversary trip. For 3 solid months leading up to it, I had immersed myself in planning. The Italy binder, a beautiful embossed leather folio, became my constant companion. It was filled with maps highlighting romantic walking routes through Florence's Oltrarno district, lists of basic Italian phrases I diligently practiced, restaurant reviews meticulously cut and pasted from gourmet magazines, and notes on local wines we simply had to try in each region. I even secretly arranged a private pasta-making lesson for 2 at a rustic farm in the Tuscan countryside, remembering a wistful comment Thomas had made years ago about wanting to learn. He knew. He watched me spend hours on this, saw the mounting excitement in my eyes, listened to me talk endlessly about the private villa I'd booked near Piazzale Michelangelo, the Uffizi tour with an art historian, the non-refundable deposits, the $15,000 draining from my personal savings account. And all the while he was secretly planning to take her. He feigned enthusiasm, even offering suggestions that in retrospect were probably hers. Maybe we should pack lighter Celeste, be more spontaneous. He'd said, a smirk playing on his lips. My best friend, Catherine Webb, my college roommate and a fiercely loyal divorce attorney, the irony is not lost on me, had noticed Thomas's cooling behavior long before I was willing to admit it. "Are you sure he's just stressed at work, Celeste?" she'd ask gently. "He seems distant." I'd brushed off her concerns, telling myself all marriages had rough patches. I'd redoubled my efforts to be the perfect wife, cooking his favorite elaborate meals, ensuring the house was immaculate, patiently listening to his work complaints, while my own achievements were met with distracted nods. The warning signs were there, flashing like neon lights I chose to interpret as festive decorations. Veronica's friendly advice a few months earlier, "Celeste, you have such classic style, but for Italy, maybe something a bit more modernized, younger. You want to look amazing for Thomas." I'd felt a prickle of discomfort, but dismissed it as me being overly sensitive. Then there was the time I'd surprised Thomas by dropping by his office to take him to lunch, only to find him and Veronica sharing a cozy conspiratorial meal at a nearby bistro. "Urgent work lunch, honey bum," he'd said a little too quickly. Veronica had been smooth professional, even asking with feigned innocence, "Oh, Celeste, are you getting excited about Italy? Thomas has told me so much about the incredible plans you're making." Her eyes, however, held a spark of something I now recognize as triumphant malice. Thomas's behavior had subtly shifted too. His phone, once casually left on the counter, now had a new password and was perpetually screened down. He'd chuckle to himself while texting quickly, angling the screen away if I came near, and then there was his sudden uncharacteristic concern for his appearance. Thomas, who usually considered ironing a shirt a Herculean effort, started going to the gym religiously, bought a slew of new trendy clothes, and began dousing himself in an expensive cologne I'd never smelled before. "Just want to look worthy of my beautiful wife on our big trip," he'd claimed, a statement so out of character it should have set off klaxon alarms. Instead, I'd naively felt a flicker of hope that he was finally re-engaging. The psychological impact was a slow erosion of my self-worth. I started to doubt myself, to wonder if I was boring if I had let myself go. I poured all my anxieties and hopes into the Italy binder, convincing myself this grand gesture, this perfectly planned romantic escape, would be the defibrillator our marriage needed. It would reignite the spark, remind him of the woman he fell in love with. Little did I know he was already fanning a different flame, and my meticulously crafted dream was about to become his stage for the ultimate betrayal, just as the curtain was about to rise. But even then, a tiny, resilient spark of the Celeste I used to be, the Celeste who could command a boardroom and close a multi-million-dollar deal, flickered deep inside. She was waiting unknowingly for the right kind of fuel to become an inferno. The morning of our departure dawned crisp and bright, a perfect Portland spring day. I was practically vibrating with excitement. 10 years, a decade of shared life culminating in this, our Italian dream. The Italy binder was safely tucked into my carry-on, its weight a comforting promise of the adventures ahead. We pulled up to the curbside check-in at Portland International Airport. Thomas seemed unusually quiet, a little fidgety, which I attributed to pre-flight nerves. As I reached into the trunk for my suitcase, the one I'd carefully packed with new sundresses and the surprise itinerary for our Tuscan pasta-making class, Thomas put a hand on my arm. "Celeste," he began, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth, "there's been a change of plans." I smiled, a little confused. "A change? Did Patricia upgrade our seats again? You know she's a miracle worker." His eyes, cold and distant, finally met mine. "No, I've made a change. I'm not taking you to Italy, Celeste." The world tilted. The cheerful cacophony of the airport, the rolling suitcases, the excited chatter, the announcements, seemed to recede, replaced by a roaring in my ears. What are you talking about, Thomas? This is our anniversary trip. Our trip to Florence." And then, like a perfectly timed stage entrance, Veronica emerged from the passenger side of our car. Veronica looking impossibly chic in a cream travel ensemble, a smug, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. She was holding a sleek new carry-on bag, my dream. "I'm taking Veronica," Thomas stated as casually as if he were announcing a change in dinner plans. His next words landed like physical blows, each one meticulously aimed to inflict maximum damage. "Let's be honest, Celeste. We've been like this for a while. You've become boring, predictable. Veronica, she makes me feel alive. This trip, this adventure, it's what I need. And she's the person I want to share it with." Boring. He called me boring. The woman who had built a career on innovation, who had orchestrated this entire symphony of a vacation down to the last perfect note. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over me. People were glancing our way, sensing the drama. Veronica, with an air of supreme self-satisfaction, stepped forward. "Don't worry, Celeste." She purred, her eyes glinting. "I'll help Thomas with the luggage." She then had the audacity to reach into the trunk, pull out my meticulously packed suitcase, and place it on the curb, replacing it with her own identical expensive brand. My voice, when I found it, was a hoarse whisper. You planned this all along." Thomas shrugged, a gesture of utter indifference. "It just sort of happened. Look, the tickets are non-refundable, the villa is booked, it's all set. It'll be easier this way." He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. He got back into the driver's seat. Veronica slid in beside him, not even gracing me with a final glance. And then they were gone, driving off to my dream vacation, leaving me standing on the curb next to my suitcase, the symbol of my $15,000 folly, my shattered heart, and 10 years of my life. Standing there amidst the chaos of airport departures, I felt a cold so profound it seemed to freeze my very soul. The meticulous research, the saved pennies, the whispered hopes for rekindled romance, all of it a public spectacle of my failure, my gullibility. For a few agonizing minutes, I was paralyzed by the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. He hadn't just left me. He'd orchestrated my public downfall. I felt utterly trapped, defeated, exposed. That was my lowest point, the curbside tableau of a woman discarded. The taxi ride home from PDX was a blur of numb disbelief. The city lights smeared past the window, each one a painful reminder of the life I thought I had. But as the miles clocked by, something began to shift within me. The initial shock, the searing humiliation, the crushing weight of betrayal. They didn't disappear, but they began to solidify, to crystallize into something else. A cold, calculating fury, an emotion so potent it was almost exhilarating. And beneath the anger, a strange, unexpected sensation, relief. The pretense was over. The years of tiptoeing around his moods, of trying to be someone worthy of his fleeting attention, were finally done. He called me boring. He thought I was predictable. Oh, honey, you have no idea. The fog of shock began to lift, replaced by an icy clarity. He hadn't just stolen a vacation. He'd underestimated me. Profoundly. My mind, the one he dismissed as merely methodical, began to whir. The meticulously planned itinerary, the reservations, the payments, a slow smile. The first genuine one in months touched my lips. The moment I walked into my silent, empty house, I didn't dissolve into tears, as he probably expected. Instead, I picked up my phone. My first call was to Catherine Webb. "Catherine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "you will not believe what that bastard Thomas just did." Catherine listened, her initial horrified gasps quickly turning into a string of creative and highly accurate epithets for Thomas and Veronica. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then her voice, laced with righteous indignation and unwavering support, came through loud and clear. "Celeste, that absolute unmitigated bottom-feeding cretin isn't worth a single one of your precious tears. He did what? Oh, he's going to rue this day, but a lavish trip to Italy planned and paid for by you, that is worth everything." He called me boring, Kath. I said the word, still a raw wound. "Boring!" Catherine shrieked. "You Celeste Beaumont, who orchestrated the Midnight Bloom campaign that netted your company millions. You who can negotiate a hostile boardroom into submission before they've had their morning coffee. Honey, the only thing boring here is his pathetic lack of imagination and his soon-to-be very empty wallet. Now listen to me and listen good. Don't cry, strategize. He underestimated you. Massively. Let's make him regret every condescending smirk, every dismissive wave of his hand. I'm booking my flight to Florence right now. We are going to Italy, and we are going to live like the goddamn queens we are." Her ferocity was a balm, her immediate, unquestioning belief in me a lifeline. "But the reservations, the flights," I started. "Celeste?" she said, her lawyer brain kicking in. "Who booked everything? Whose name is on the credit card receipts? Whose email confirmations are sitting in your inbox?" A slow, predatory grin spread across my face. Mine, all mine. My next call was to Patricia Henderson, my travel agent at Voyages of Distinction, a woman whose efficiency was legendary. "Patricia," I began, keeping my voice calm and professional, "it's Celeste Beaumont. I have an urgent and rather unusual request regarding my Florence booking for Thomas and Celeste Beaumont." I explained the situation briefly, clinically. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, Patricia, ever the consummate professional, but with an unmistakable hint of outrage in her tone, said, "Ms. Beaumont, Celeste, I am so incredibly, deeply sorry to hear this. This is unconscionable." She paused. "Let me just pull up your file. Yes, I see. All bookings, the first-class flights, the private villa, La Terrazza Fiorita, the car service, the tours, the restaurant deposits, everything is indeed under your name, Celeste, and charged to your Amex Platinum." Another pause, and then her voice shifted, acquiring a distinct note of satisfaction. "Transferring Mr. Thomas Beaumont's portion of the airline ticket to a guest of your choosing and reconfirming all land arrangements exclusively in your name and that of your new guest is actually quite straightforward. In fact, it would be my distinct pleasure. Consider it done, Celeste. Who will be your new travel companion?" "Catherine Webb." I said the name a beacon. "She'll be on a flight from Chicago." "Excellent," Patricia said. "I'll handle everything. Thomas Beaumont will find he has a return flight from Florence in 2 weeks as originally ticketed on his portion, but all other arrangements will be exclusively yours." She even managed to get Catherine on a flight that would connect with mine in Amsterdam so we'd arrive in Florence together. The stakes were not just raised. They were on a private jet to Italy, and Thomas wasn't even at the airport yet. Later that evening, Catherine having already emailed me her flight confirmation, I pulled out the Italy binder. What had hours ago represented a decade of misplaced devotion and naivete, now transformed. It was no longer a symbol of love lost, but a meticulously detailed blueprint for retribution. Catherine, on a video call, watched as I flipped through the pages, a new steely glint in my eye. "Okay, so," I said, tapping the confirmation for Villa La Terrazza Fiorita with its private pool and panoramic views. "Thomas thinks he's checking into this slice of heaven tomorrow afternoon. He has the address. He probably even has the key code I was so excited to share with him." Catherine grinned, "Which will no longer work because Patricia, bless her efficient heart, has already had it changed and emailed the new one to you along with confirming that only Celeste Beaumont and guest are expected." "Exactly," I said. "Every Michelin-starred restaurant reservation, every private tour of the Uffizi and Accademia, every wine tasting in Tuscany, the vintage Alfa Romeo Spider booked for our scenic drives, the private chef scheduled for 3 evenings. He won't experience a single delectable, luxurious bit of it." It was in that moment, meticulously reviewing my own painstaking work, that the full, unvarnished truth of Thomas's character slammed into me. This wasn't an impulsive mistake, a moment of midlife crisis madness. This was a calculated, cruel, and profoundly arrogant act of betrayal. He hadn't just grown distant. He had actively, consciously deceived me for months, watching me pour my heart, my energy, and my money into something he planned to usurp. The condescension, the subtle put-downs, his increasing praise for Veronica while diminishing me, it all coalesced into a sickening picture of a man I didn't know at all, a man who had exploited my love and trust for his own selfish, tawdry gratification. This wasn't just about a ruined trip anymore. This was about 10 years of my life, my loyalty, my future, all casually discarded on an airport curb like yesterday's trash. He didn't just want a different vacation partner. He wanted to humiliate me, to reinforce his narrative that I was boring, and he was alive. My breaking point had arrived not with tears of despair, but with a surge of cold, crystalline anger. That anger was a revelation. It was power. The Celeste he thought was boring. The Celeste he so casually dismissed was about to get very, very interesting. "He wants an adventure, Catherine," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "He wants to feel alive. Well, I'm about to give him an experience in Florence he will never, ever forget. An authentic, immersive, character-building experience." The decision wasn't just to go on the trip, it was to orchestrate an exquisite downfall. I would use every detail of my meticulous planning, every luxurious element he craved as a weapon. He would arrive in Florence expecting paradise, and he would find nothing. And I would make damn sure he knew exactly who was responsible for his discomfort, exactly what he was missing, and exactly how much power he had so foolishly, so arrogantly handed me. The game was on. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, thrillingly alive. Florence was even more beautiful than I had dared to dream. When Catherine and I arrived, the prearranged car service whisked us away from the bustling Amerigo Vespucci airport, not to a cramped hotel room, but to Via La Terrazza Fiorita. It was breathtaking. Ancient stone wisteria dripping from the pergolas and a terrace that opened onto a postcard-perfect panorama of the Duomo and the terracotta rooftops of the city. The air smelled of jasmine and old magic. Patricia had outdone herself. A chilled bottle of Prosecco and a platter of local cheeses and prosciutto awaited us. To new beginnings. Catherine toasted her eyes sparkling as much as the wine. And to Thomas and Veronica's imminent 5-star airport floor experience. We clinked glasses. I had Thomas's new Italian SIM card number. He'd smugly texted it to me from the plane before takeoff from Portland. A final little twist of the knife. Just landed in Amsterdam, Florence soon. "You should see Veronica. She's practically glowing. Hope you're not too bored back there. Tea?" Oh, the irony was delicious. I'd saved the number a digital leash to his impending doom, around 3 p.m. Florence time. As Catherine and I were lounging by our private pool soaking in the Tuscan sun, my phone placed strategically beside me buzzed. It was an unknown Italian number. Thomas, right on schedule. I let it ring a few times, took a deep, calming breath, and answered with my most pleasant, unconcerned voice. "Pronto, Celeste speaking." "Celeste? Finally!" Thomas's voice was tight with irritation. "Where the hell is the car service? Veronica and I have been waiting at the Florence airport for over an hour. It's chaos here. And the villa manager, Lorenzo, isn't answering the number I have. What's going on?" I swirled the Prosecco in my glass, catching Catherine's eye. She gave me a thumbs up. "Oh, Thomas, darling," I cooed, injecting a note of innocent surprise. "Didn't I tell you there's been a slight, well, rather significant change of plans? My plans, actually. The car service was absolutely divine, by the way, exclusively for my guest and me." I paused, letting Catherine's delighted giggle drift clearly into the microphone. "As is the villa. La Terrazza Fiorita is even more stunning in person, isn't it, Catherine?" "Absolutely heavenly Celeste," Catherine called out loudly, followed by the distinct clink of her glass against mine. "You have impeccable taste." There was a stunned silence on Thomas's end. Then, What do you mean, your guest? What are you talking about? What about our reservations, our anniversary? Our anniversary." I laughed a light, airy sound that held no amusement, only ice. "Thomas, you declared our anniversary and indeed our marriage null and void at the Portland Airport curbside, remember, when you so eloquently informed me I was boring and drove off with your alive secretary. As for the reservations, the villa, the tours, the private chef, the Michelin-starred restaurant bookings, the charming little Alfa Romeo, they were all meticulously booked and paid for by my credit card in my name. Therefore, they are mine. And I decided to bring someone who actually appreciates me and my planning skills. Say hello to Catherine Webb Thomas. She flew in from Chicago just for this." Catherine leaned closer to the phone. "Ciao, Thomas, Veronica," she chirped, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Florence is simply divine, though honestly you probably wouldn't like it. Far too stimulating for you, perhaps. Lots of old buildings art. Might be a bit, boring for your evolved tastes." I could hear Veronica's shrill voice in the background. "What is she saying, Thomas? What's going on? My feet are killing me." Thomas's voice was a strangled whisper. "Celeste, you can't do this. This is insane. Where are we supposed to stay? That Thomas," I said, my voice now devoid of all warmth, "is entirely your adventure to discover. You wanted to feel alive. Remember? Navigate that. You're a big, resourceful boy. I'm sure you and Veronica will figure something out. Now, if you'll excuse us, Catherine and I are about to enjoy some more of this delightful Prosecco before our private guided tour of the Oltrarno. Ciao." I hung up. The next 48 hours were punctuated by a series of increasingly frantic and desperate voicemails from Thomas. Catherine and I would listen to them in the evenings, sipping Chianti on our magnificent terrace, the lights of Florence twinkling below us, like a million fallen stars witnessing his slow, agonizing descent into helpless fury. Voicemail 1 approx. 2 hours after the first call, Thomas's voice tight with controlled rage. "Celeste, pick up the damn phone. This isn't funny anymore. We've tried a dozen hotels. Everything is fully booked. Apparently there's some giant medical conference in town. What did you do? You have to tell me where our original bookings were." He still thought there were our bookings. Voicemail 2 approx. 6 hours later, sounding strained and tired. "Celeste, seriously. Veronica is... She's not handling this well. We're still at the airport. It's getting late. My credit card just got declined trying to book a ridiculously overpriced room outside the city. The exchange rate is killing me on the cash I have. Just call me back. We can sort this out." While they were sorting it out, Catherine and I were having dinner at La Giostra, a restaurant I'd booked months in advance. Its fairy tale ambiance, an exquisite Tuscan cuisine a world away from the fluorescent misery of an airport terminal. The next morning, I decided a little visual aid was in order. I posted a single carefully curated photo on my rarely used Instagram account. It was a selfie of Catherine and me, radiant and laughing, clinking Aperol spritzes on our sun-drenched villa terrace, the iconic Florentine skyline sprawling majestically behind us. The caption was simple, yet pointed, reclaiming my time and my reservations. "Florence, you are a dream. In Italy, Hansh anniversary for 1+1. Chinjash, Florence adventures, self-love, had boring no more." I knew Thomas in his desperation would eventually check my social media. Voicemail 3 mid-morning day. Oh. Thomas's voice now laced with panic and exhaustion. Celeste, I saw your Instagram. Very funny. Ha ha. We spent the night at the airport, on the floor. Veronica is beside herself. She's crying. She wants to go home. My back is killing me. I've spent almost all my cash trying to bribe taxi drivers to find us anywhere. This is a nightmare. You have to help us. Please. Voicemail, 4 late afternoon. Day tau. Thomas sounds utterly broken, almost whimpering. Celeste, please, I don't know what to do. Veronica hasn't stopped crying for hours. She blames me for everything. We haven't eaten properly. We smell. People are staring. For God's sake, Celeste, what do you want? An apology. You've got it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just make it stop. Catherine and I listened to that last one over a platter of fresh figs and pecorino, followed by the private pasta-making class at the Tuscan farm. It was glorious, rolling out the dough, sipping local wine, laughing with the nonna who ran the class. It was everything I dreamed of, shared with someone who genuinely cherished me. That evening, after 2 full days of their Florentine hell, I decided it was time for the final act. I called Thomas. He answered on the first ring, his voice a ragged plea. Celeste. Oh, thank God. Thomas. I said, my voice calm, measured, utterly devoid of emotion. I trust you and Veronica are enjoying the authentic, immersive Italian experience you craved. Celeste, please, he begged. Stop it. We're miserable. Just tell us what to do. Get us a hotel. Anything. Actually, Thomas, I replied, I've already taken care of part of the problem. I've arranged a one-way economy class ticket back to Portland for Veronica. It leaves from Florence tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. The booking confirmation and e-ticket have been sent to her work email address. She should check it. I heard a gasp, then Veronica's voice, hopeful for the first time. A ticket home. Yes, Veronica, I said loud enough for her to hear. A ticket home. I'm doing this not for you, and certainly not for him. I'm doing it to show you the fundamental difference between a woman who plans meticulously and a man who steals carelessly and then crumbles when his little scheme backfires. He's your problem now, or rather, he will be until you board that flight. Thomas sputtered. But what about me, Celeste? You can't just leave me here. Oh, but I can, Thomas, I said, savoring each word. You told me I was boring. You told me Veronica made you feel alive. You wanted an adventure, a thrill. So here it is. Feel alive, Thomas. Figure it out. Perhaps sleeping on the cold, hard floor of the Amerigo Vespucci Airport for a 3rd night will spark some of that much-vaunted vitality you're so desperately seeking. You wanted a new life. This is your chance to build it from the ground up, preferably after a good shower. Celeste, we're married, he cried, his voice cracking. You can't do this to your husband. Funny you should mention that, Thomas, I said, a chill in my tone that could freeze the Arno. The status of our marriage is something I'll have my lawyer reach out to yours about as soon as I return to Portland, which, by the way, will be after another 12 glorious Thomas-free days in this beautiful country. I paused. Enjoy the rest of your adventure. Oh, and Thomas, one last thing. What? He whispered. Don't ever call me boring again. I pressed end call and then calmly blocked his number. Catherine raised her glass. To Celeste, she said, her voice filled with admiration. The queen of Florentine fuck around and find out. In our luxurious villa surrounded by beauty and true friendship, I felt a profound sense of triumph. The power dynamic hadn't just been reversed, it had been obliterated. He was helpless, stranded, and utterly dependent on the boring wife he had so cruelly discarded. The look on his face, were I to see it, would be priceless, but his voice cracking with desperation over the phone was more than enough. Justice served chilled with a side of Italian sunshine. The 48 hours following that final decisive phone call were for Catherine and me utter bliss. It was as if a heavy cloak had been lifted from my shoulders. We explored Florence with a lightheartedness I hadn't felt in years. We climbed to the top of Brunelleschi's dome, marveling at the ingenuity and the views. We wandered through the bubbly gardens, got delightfully lost in the Oltrarno's artisan workshops, and ate gelato at least twice a day. We took that vintage Alfa Romeo Spider for a spin through the Tuscan hills. The sun on our faces, the scent of cypress and earth in the air, laughing until our sides ached. The private chef prepared exquisite meals at the villa, which we savored on the terrace under starry skies. The Italy binder, now a treasured log of triumphs, rather than a monument to betrayal. Every moment Thomas was suffering was a moment I was reclaiming my joy, my time, my life. Meanwhile, the reports from the front lines, or rather what I pieced together later, were grim for Team Thomas. Veronica, true to my arrangements, took her economy flight back to Portland. She apparently arrived looking disheveled and traumatized, refusing to speak to anyone at their company about what had transpired, and tendered her resignation via email less than a week later. The humiliation of being sent back alone, essentially airlifted out of a disaster of her own making, was a bitter pill. Thomas, truly alone, humiliated and rapidly depleting what little cash he had left, was forced into the ultimate indignity, calling his elderly mother for a loan to buy a last-minute, exorbitant economy ticket home. He apparently spent another 2 nights in the less-than-luxurious Florence airport terminal, a pariah among travelers, before finally securing a flight with multiple layovers. Upon his eventual sheepish and decidedly less alive return to Portland, nearly 3 days after Veronica, he found his world irrevocably changed. His key no longer worked in the front door of our house. A polite but firm email from my newly retained, notoriously sharp divorce attorney, Eleanor Vance, a recommendation from Catherine, of course, was waiting in his inbox. It informed him that divorce proceedings had been initiated on grounds of adultery and extreme cruelty. It also provided the address and access code for a climate-controlled storage unit, where all his personal belongings had been professionally packed and moved. The locks on the house had been changed, the alarm system code reset. His attempts at damage control were pathetic and fruitless. He left a string of pleading, then angry, then self-pitying voicemails on my phone, which I'd unblocked simply for the amusement of hearing them before forwarding them to Eleanor. He tried to show up at my office. Security politely but firmly escorted him out. He even tried to enlist mutual friends to talk some sense into Celeste, only to find that the story of the Italian job, as it was now gleefully nicknamed in our circles, had spread like wildfire. The public and community reaction was swift and brutal for Thomas. Gossip fueled by the sheer audacity of his actions and the delicious completeness of his comeuppance painted him as a fool and a cad. Colleagues at his engineering firm and mine exchanged knowing glances and whispered details. He became a laughingstock, the man who tried to trade in his wife for a younger model and ended up sleeping on an airport floor. Several women I knew who had previously been coolly polite now approached me with warmth and admiration. "You go, girl," one whispered at a local coffee shop. He had it coming. My response to Thomas's desperate attempts to contact me was a wall of dignified silence mediated entirely by Eleanor. New boundaries were not just established, they were fortified with steel. I refused to be drawn into any further drama. My focus was on healing, on rediscovering myself, and on planning the next chapter of my life, a chapter that would be entirely gloriously Thomas-free. My newfound confidence was palpable. I walked taller, smiled more freely. The boring Celeste was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The support system of Catherine Patricia, who sent me a beautiful bouquet upon my return with a note saying, "To courage and new adventures," and other friends rallied around me, creating a protective and empowering circle. The immediate aftermath was not about gloating. It was about quietly, firmly, and decisively taking back my power, and Italy had been the perfect, most beautiful stage for it. A year can change everything. 12 months after my unscheduled solo +1 trip to Italy, the Celeste, who sipped her morning coffee in her sun-drenched Portland kitchen, was a woman transformed. The divorce from Thomas had been finalized 6 months prior. Thanks to Eleanor Vance's formidable skills and Thomas's well-documented idiocy, the airport texts, and Veronica's swift departure were particularly useful. The settlement was decisively in my favor. I kept the house our primary asset, which I had already begun to redecorate, erasing his somber, masculine aesthetic and infusing it with light color and my own personality. Professionally, I was soaring. The confidence and decisiveness I'd rediscovered in Florence had translated directly into my work. I spearheaded a groundbreaking campaign for a new sustainable travel company, earning accolades and a significant promotion to Vice President of Marketing. Some whispered that I might even start my own consultancy, perhaps specializing in luxury experiential travel. After all, my Italy binder skills were now legendary. My appearance reflected my inner state. I'd embraced a chic, shorter haircut that framed my face and highlighted my eyes, and my wardrobe was filled with stylish, vibrant pieces that made me feel good, a far cry from the modernized or younger attire Veronica had once so condescendingly suggested. My personal life blossomed. I'd taken up salsa dancing, something I'd always wanted to try, and found a joyful, welcoming community there. Travel became a regular fixture. A long weekend in Montreal with Catherine, a solo trip to explore the art scene in Santa Fe, and I was in the early stages of planning a more adventurous trek to Patagonia. My dinner parties were now filled with genuine laughter, interesting conversations, and people who celebrated my successes and shared my zest for life. One crisp autumn evening, about a year after the Italy trip, I was sitting on my newly redecorated patio, a glass of rich Brunello di Montalcino, a deliberate, smiling nod to Tuscany, in my hand. I was idly flipping through a travel magazine, a soft cashmere throw over my lap. A profound sense of complete contentment settled over me. I felt more like myself than I had in over a decade. The realization was clear and bright. I was truly, deeply happy. And I was free. Free from Thomas's negativity, free from the weight of his expectations, free from the self-doubt he had so carefully cultivated. As for Thomas Karma, as they say, had delivered a masterclass. His career had tanked. The public humiliation and the whispers of his unprofessional conduct, as his company delicately termed the affair, and its disastrous public implosion made him a liability. He was quietly demoted, then encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. The last I heard, he was struggling in a mid-level position at a much smaller, less prestigious firm. Financially, he was strained. The divorce settlement, coupled with the cost of his Italian fiasco and Veronica's swift abandonment, she'd reportedly told a mutual acquaintance that she couldn't respect a man who fell apart so easily, had left him depleted. He was living in a small, rather grim apartment across town, socially isolated, and by all accounts, deeply bitter. He'd tried online dating, but the story of the Italian job guy had a surprisingly long reach in Portland's relatively small professional circles. Veronica had also faced her reckoning. After quitting Thomas's company, her reputation as a homewrecker, and perhaps more damningly as a key player in such a spectacularly cringeworthy and public scandal, made finding a comparable position difficult. She eventually moved to another state, hoping to leave the notoriety behind. The dynamics within our old social circle had shifted dramatically. People who had once tolerated Thomas's subtle digs at me, or who had perhaps seen me as quiet and unassuming, now looked at me with a new respect, sometimes even a touch of awe. Catherine, of course, remained my staunchest ally and dearest friend, our bond forged even stronger by our shared Italian adventure. One afternoon, while clearing out a bookshelf, I came across the Italy binder. I picked it up, running my fingers over the embossed leather. There was no lingering pain, no bitterness. Instead, I felt a quiet surge of triumph, of gratitude for the unexpected catalyst it had become. I smiled, then walked over to my desk and took out a new empty journal, this one a vibrant teal. On the first page, I wrote, "Patagonia adventure begins." I was no longer the woman who would meticulously plan her life around someone else's fleeting desires. I was the architect of my own extraordinary future. The Celeste who had stood humiliated on an airport curb was a distant memory. The woman sipping wine on her patio, planning her next solo conquest of the world, was home. My story isn't just about revenge, though I'll admit that part was incredibly satisfying. It's about reclaiming your power, your joy, your voice, and your life when someone tries to diminish you to make you feel small or boring. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the most unexpected liberations. Never let anyone else define your worth or dictate your happiness. You are far more resourceful and resilient than you or they might think. So I have to ask you, what's the most empowering step you've ever taken for yourself after a betrayal, big or small? If this story resonated with you, like if you believe in turning pain into power and serving justice with a side of fabulous, subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice served, and living your best life after the storm. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear that they are capable of rewriting their own story, starring themselves as the hero. Comment on your hometown below and tell me one way you've chosen yourself, or one small act of glorious self-care you're planning this week. And please tag a friend who embodies strength, self-respect, and the spirit of a true survivor. Remember, the best revenge isn't just about settling scores. It's about building a life so fulfilling, so joyful, that the past simply pales in comparison. It's a life lived fabulously, unapologetically on your own terms. You hold the pen, go write your masterpiece. We're a community of survivors and thrivers here. Let's continue to lift each other up, share our victories, and remind each other that our stories are far from over. They're just beginning.